Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets lose their third straight, falling to Detroit. But in the process, we get a reminder that Noah Clowney is coming on strong as the season progresses, and also an update to the potential trade package with OKC. Could a less than full delivery of everything Sean Marks wants still be enough? We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Arbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We're free on all those great platforms. And let you know today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And Doug, where we get started, as always, as ever, the impressive. The Nets, a 3-game losing streak. They fall to Detroit. And now, over these last 3 games, 113-98 to Detroit here, but also a combined 50-plus points in their 3 last losses here. Stacking up in the direction of a team that we thought would be tanking and losing some games in hard ways here as the season progresses.
Well, we said that when you're 8.5-point underdogs to Detroit at home, that it's starting to be look in the mirror time. Didn't cover. So
yes. Dangerous days when we're no longer covering the spreads.
The spread alone was a signal that there was major problems here. To have that spread and then not cover is another situation altogether. And look, this is just what we signed up for, right? We knew this. We knew this going in. We said this last year. We said this if they were going to trade Mikal Bridges, if they were going to go this direction, if they were going to just get their picks back from the Rockets, that this is kind of what happened. And personally, I was prepared. I knew that like this is going to happen because this is just kind of how it goes. And I think other folks knew it also. And then there's some others that are coming on board with it maybe a little bit too late, and that can be a frustrating sort of set of circumstances when you watch. I mean, these games. I'll put it this way: these games basically unwatchable from a Nets perspective. I'm not going to really mix words here. It's from a basketball perspective. I thought they would struggle to score 85 points when I saw what was going on in the first 6 minutes. They were able to kind of pull it together. There's some things we can take away on a player level, which we're going to do. And that is going to be the theme of probably the rest of the season. On a basketball level, I'm just going to warn you right now. There's not a lot of takeaways here from an X's and O's standpoint. This is brutal. And I'll get into it. I've been going on forever now, but overall, this is kind of the operating standard now. And we're going to have to kind of focus more on a player level for what we see for guys as they build toward the future.
Yeah, I think you and I anticipated maybe this coming a little bit sooner. Obviously, some guys played very well to start the season. And the veterans, the influences we've talked about a lot of Jordi Fernandez and coming in the door, and the veteran players kind of understanding, hey, this is the system. It put a lot of guys in really good spots to be successful. And now you get into, between injuries and trades, where you're just putting out guys, one, that either really don't have any business being out there and playing these big minute loads that they're starting to see here over these last handful of games, or also just don't have the experience and are learning on the fly. So if you're Jordi Fernandez and this coaching staff, you know that you're probably going to have to keep simplifying things to make sure that these guys are mostly getting in their right spots, mostly running the right offensive system that you want. And then still, just from a talent level, and we said this the other day, coming out of these last couple of games, the other team's just going to be better. They're just going to be a better team. There's going to be better matchups across the board, essentially. And I think you're right. The X's and O's, which we've been kind of impressed by on a game-to-game basis, and what Jordy's done, and how some individual players have been used, and how Cam Johnson has been so impressive this year. But we are clearly entering that phase where it's going to be, and we've said this the last couple of games as well. Oh, really good performance from player X, right? Gotta love that his percentage is here. We're going to talk about Noah Clowney today, but we're not spend, I don't think, as many games as we were early in the year talking about the total team and what they accomplished again. And by the way, we're only 3 games removed from playing and beating the Milwaukee Bucks. So it's not like this is light years ago that the Nets were doing it, but every time the Nets have removed a veteran from this rotation, you continue to see how it exposes more and more of the holes and the deficiencies that they have in the rest of their roster.
Yeah, well, I don't think it could be like this every game. I think D'Angelo Russell's going to come back. Cam Johnson's going to play some more games, right? Ben Simmons will play some more games. I don't think this will be like this every single game. This illustrates the cliff, how far the cliff drops when just a few things happen. Yeah. That's the illustration. I think there's going to play. We're going to get those 3 guys I just mentioned back at some point, and they'll probably play a game or a couple games together. and they'll look like a functional basketball team. They're just, the situation here is like when those guys out, you can see how quickly the talent drops. I mean, I'm not overstating this. On an NBA guard level, they have
that's
last night played like 1.5 NBA guys who can dribble. I mean, like that. I'm being serious about that. I might like Keon Johnson's been playing off guard for them for most of the season. He's the de facto point guard. Reese Beekman is kind of a guard, but I mean, the guy never wants to shoot a basketball. Like, so he can dribble, but he's a guard in like sort of a sense and stature, but he's more of a defensive guy first. That's the guard. Those are the guards. Like, and Tyrese Martin's a shooting, pretty prototypical shooting guard. And Jalen Wilson's kind of like a combo 2-3. There's no point guards. When you have a functional NBA point guard on your roster, it's impossible to generate offense unless your wings are like so awesome. It's like, oh, your wings are Tatum and Jalen, and they still have Derek White and Drew Holiday, right? So it's just really, really tough to get anything going when that is your guard situation, because it's just not really how the NBA works. And look, it just doesn't take much. D'Lo, Simmons, these guys are out. And it's like Simmons isn't even a prototypical point guard, but they just don't have any ball handling. Thank goodness. I mean, I'll tell you right now, I know I'm going on forever here, but thank God Jordy put in a system, like sort of a motion offense with lots of DHO, lots of screening, because that's actually the way you stay even somewhat competitive. But we were in the Jacques Vaughn the era of clear it out and cook, or whatever they were doing, like one screen and call it a day, right? Or whatever, like the kind of the stuff they were doing. I mean, it would be horrible. Yeah. It's really actually Jordy's system that's keeping them sort of like active enough to keep defenses kind of on their back heels at times. Oh my goodness gracious! If this was last year,
I know it's so funny to think about that. I mean, it feels like it would just be almost that old school ABA style basketball, throwing it around the perimeter aggressively. Back to you, now back to me, now back to you, and just a total lack of actual penetration against defense. I mean,
they were just like all the offense was like
last year, right?
I left off. I've done this a couple of times where I've left off Cam Thomas out of that group of like good players, and that's my bad. I'm probably gonna catch heat for that, and it would be well deserved. I just for some reason have left him out. He's the guy. I should have listed him first in terms of like guys where they could score. So that's completely 100% my bad. You can roast me in the comments if you want, but like just getting those guys back will make a huge difference. I feel I almost want to start it over. I feel so stupid for not saying his name first, but
isn't it? It has been weird. I will say because we keep making this list of players, but because Cam Thomas and his injuries, he came back, but then immediately went back out with injury again. He's been removed from kind of the thought process on what the team has been with the veterans, what it's been during the injuries, what it is right now, what it will be coming out of it. Obviously, he's the most critical player to this roster, but it's
he's not a guy that
right. Yeah. It just changes the way you talk about a team.
And we don't talk about him in terms of trades either. So like we kind of just don't talk about he doesn't come up in that part of the conversation either. Sorry to cut you off, but like I'm trying to think about why that wouldn't have come up first. But he kind of doesn't come up in any of those conversations because he's just there and we think he's going to be on the team anyway. I feel silly for leaving him off.
Let's keep this conversation going on the other side here. The Nets lose 113-98 to the Detroit Pistons. Some of the percentages tell you why it's been a rough road in the absence of key players, but there was a bright spot, and his name is Noah Clowney. We dive into his individual performance coming up here in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, I'll tell you about our friends over at Gametime, going to live events, sports, music, theater, comedy. It's all where the action is. Some of your favorite memories of when kind of this stuff happens, when you're actually able to go see the stuff live. I actually just went and saw a live podcast with my daughter. I mean, I'm talking about like the exciting stuff here. Even the podcast was, no, that's something much better. Even that was like, I was like, oh, we're here for the live thing. This is just where the memories are made, folks. If you go over to Gametime right now, look, they're going to make the game. They're going to use the Gametime picks. Going to make it super easy. They're going to filter out the fluff. It's just going to show you great deals on great seats. You don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. On Gametime right now, you got Knicks at Nets starting at $67 in Barclays. That's next Tuesday. Not bad. Old friend Kevin Durant next Wednesday. Suns at Nets started at $19. Get in on that. Then we got Heat at Nets from $26. You're not going to find better deals than that over at Gametime. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. And let you know today's episode is brought to you by Rocket RX. If you're ready to boost your confidence and take control of the bedroom, Rocket RX has the solution. Imagine feeling more prepared and performing at your best. Rocket RX makes it simple and stress-free. Rocket RX offers FDA-approved treatments for erectile dysfunction at a lower cost than branded alternatives. No more uncomfortable doctor visits or pharmacy trips. Everything's delivered straight to your door in discreet plain packaging. With Rocket RX, you'll get trusted care from a real U.S. clinical team. Complete a quick 100% online consultation. You can get your free prescription today. Visit rocketrx.com to get started now. It only takes 2 minutes. Right now, our listeners can get 40% off your first order when you use that code LOCKEDONNBA. That's rocketrx.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for 40% off your first order. Terms and conditions apply. Rocket RX, better sex made simple.
All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about the Brooklyn Nets, talking about another loss here against the Detroit Pistons, and obviously focusing in on individual performances as opposed to what we've been doing earlier in the season, thinking about the system and what Jordi Fernandez is instilling in this team. It may take a little bit of time. And, to your point as well, when it comes to, okay, no Cam Johnson right now, well, we think is going to be traded here sooner than later. Obviously, what happens with Ben Simmons in the back half of the season, I think is going to be fascinating. But I am excited to get through the trade deadline, to have it. Okay, now this is the roster, to get back guys fully healthy, because it's not just the veterans that aren't playing right now. It's also even some of the depth pieces that haven't been available for Brooklyn either. I'm very interested to see 20, 30 games where Jordi Fernandez has the roster, sets the rotations, gets guys a little bit back into their slots here. And you mentioned too, D'Angelo Russell is probably a key part of that, as long as he's on this team, of helping to make that offense still work and flow and function. And maybe, I don't know, this kid, Cam Thomas, we don't know much about him. He's certainly been around the roster for a while. Maybe he gets back on the court. Standout for me, though, obviously standout for the Brooklyn Nets in this game has to be, in a game where they shot 38% from the field and 33% from beyond the arc, we focus our attention on one Noah Clowney, who gave you 37. That's right, 37 minutes, 9 of 20 from the field, 5 of 11 from deep, got to the line 6 times, perfect there as well. 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals, 29 points. This is easily, for me, going to be the biggest silver lining of the rest of this season, is watching how Noah Clowney's game continues to develop and grow and what that looks like. Even took an arm bar to the throat and still performed at a high level last night.
Yeah, like that little forearm shiver to the esophagus, not bad. Just out of nowhere, just kind
of NBA play. It's an NBA move, not chippy, not a contentious moment. Just a player running in the open space towards the basket and just kind of getting armbarred.
I don't think he should have been kicked out, but it was close. I could have seen it. I could have seen him getting kicked out for that. That looked moderately intentional. There's just no reason to put your arm up. Whatever, heat of the moment. It happens. Isaiah Stewart. Yeah, Clowney, 37 minutes, looked really good here. Continues to just bomb threes. He's still more than 50% of his takes here were threes, although that percentage is down from what he'd basically been shooting this year, which I think was like 62% of his threes, or something like that. I'll look that up as when I'm done with this point. But like overall, that was the kind of the thing we wanted to see. It was like, hey, look, he's acting as kind of like a 6'10" glorified shooting guard, right? Overall this season, he's basically only taking 3-pointers. If you looked at the breakdown percentage of his shot diet, it really tracks.
7 shots from the field, 143 from beyond the arc.
Yeah, I have it up in my database here, but I just don't have it up right now, and I have to like type to
but I said the
I'll do it. But basically, I'm sure it hasn't changed too much. And at the time, the last time I looked at it, the list of names among the group that he was shooting the same sort of percentage with were all prototypical shooting guards. It was like Klay Thompson, Malik Beasley, guys like this that are just like, oh, they just track his twos and shooting guards, and then they just take threes, and that's kind of all they do. It's either you take a three or you get back on defense, and and that's kind of the end of it. And which makes sense for those guys, but doesn't always make sense for sort of a stretch 4 who maybe sometimes would play the 5. But he really hasn't played the 5 too much this year. They paired him with Claxton a lot. They pair him with Daron Sharp at times, even he'd be out there with DFS. And so we need to see that elevation of his game. The great news, though, is if you have a guy of his just metrics, right, 6'9", that can shoot 39% from 3, I'm just going to assume all the other stuff's going to come. Right, like because the other stuff is way harder. Sorry. The other stuff is way easier.
Yes.
Yeah. The other stuff is way easier, where you can just block shots and kind of be a weak side rim protector and have a nose for the ball for rebounds. I don't know. It just hasn't really happened this year. Part of it's because they just have him out of the 3-point line. I mean, his per minute rebounding percentage has dropped off, and so overall, this sounds like I'm damning with faint praise. this is a really, really good game from him. I think if you have a guy with this length that can shoot 39% from three and it has no problem, catching and firing, you're just going to really have something like in 2 years, or, you know what I mean? Like, he's 20 years old, and this is just possibly very special skill set to be able to do this. And so it's really exciting. In this game, it wasn't a coming out party because we kind of knew it, but this game was, can he be a guy that scores 30 points in a game just because of what he can do? Yeah, basically that's kind of the story.
Yes, that was the takeaway in this one. Kind of like, wow, 29 points. It's just, okay, like you're talking about something a little bit different. He had 14 against Indiana, but then comes in games, when he's playing 19 to 20 and even 28 minutes, going back to the game against Toronto at the beginning of January, 5 points over 28 minutes, right? Like 2 of 5, only 5 shot attempts from the field. I think what becomes interesting for him too, especially as the season progresses, right now, we understand who was on or not on the court last night for the Brooklyn Nets. As you go forward and you get back D'Angelo Russell and you get back Ben Simmons, the Cam Johnson piece and taking him out of the shooting volume equation for this team going forward, that is going to open it up for a lot of guys. We anticipate certain players like Jalen Wilson seeing their roles expand as well. But I'll be curious to see the consistency of what his shot diet is. Not selection 3-pointers inside the arc, et cetera, the game expansion, but just what percentage of the shooting pie does he represent on a night in, night out basis for this team? Because that'll also tell you a lot. Sometimes I think we discuss development of players and what their roles are. And there is this world where, I want Noah Clowney being the guy that takes the fourth most shots on the roster as you're getting down into the latter stage of the season. Why? Because he's the guy that's going to be there next year. He's the guy that when you pair him with draft pick X, or free agent Y, when you go and pursue superstars another 2 years from now, he's going to be the player that you look at and say, yes, this is the guy that can open things up on both ends of the floor, that can help take the pressure off defensively, that can do what he's been doing right now, shooting at a high clip from beyond the arc. So I do like to think about his developmental track and saying it can't just be that he's out on the court and getting some experience. You also want to see it continue to grow in terms of how he's utilized and how the team treats him in terms of being one of the needle movers for the roster going forward.
Totally. And that's why it's sometimes hard to evaluate sort of like what he's done this year on an offensive level, because it's been so different, right? And it's you want to take it as all positive because he's able to actually do it. Like, it's like, take a lot of threes. Well, okay, what do you shoot for? Basically 40% from three. Like, you should do that. Like, the math works on that. And
he, by the way, said coming out, sorry not to interrupt, coming out of college, he mentioned the post game where he said, shot 29% in college, but he's like, I knew that I could do it. I just needed the opportunity. I come to Brooklyn, and then it was basically, and look at me now, like a very like matter of fact, and look at me now, like I knew I could do it, and now I'm showing you that I can do it. So I'm not surprised, essentially, that I'm doing what I'm doing now at the NBA level.
So real quick, I did bring up this, threes as a percentage of your shot attempts this year. And I queried it by 125 attempts. So just like you actually play a decent amount of minutes. I'm not going to read the whole list, but you're going to get a sense of the names here. It's AJ Green, Sam Merrill, Garrison Matthews, Peyton Pritchard, Dante DiVincenzo, Grayson Allen, like Duncan Robinson, Malik Beasley, Derek. These are all basically just, shooting guards, right? The one guy that's on this list that doesn't, it's funny, the one guy that's on this list that doesn't have that makeup is Al Horford. Now, that's also system too, because Boston just bombs a ton of threes. And he actually, when they play with Staps, he plays more of the four, and they play him and they just do a spread. They do a completely spread offense because they want to get the wings downhill. That's just an interesting guy that I'm not making any claims about this, but it's just an interesting guy that's kind of on there. That's like, you have a big that can shoot threes and they kind of only want him to do that. I don't know. Interesting to throw it up there. Overall, I think if you spend a year, you talk about development and people want to see development as like this linear track. If you spend a year saying, we want you to shoot tons of threes so you get so comfortable doing that, the rest of this will come, right? When we have better guards and when we just play a slightly different system, we'll get you closer to the basket. And that's just what we're going to end up doing. But this year is going to be about bombing, like literally bombing threes all game long. I do wonder if that's like part of what they've talked about, because it's such a removal from what he had done before that it feels nothing but intentional. Right. And I don't know.
No, coming up here in a second, I want to extend that the philosophy of developing a young player like Noah Clowney and how long do you need to stay on one track before you move on to the next. Plus, a clear indication looking back at this box score as to why the Brooklyn Nets didn't beat the Detroit Pistons on a random Wednesday night in January. We'll cover
Is
that
there one
here
number
to close out coming up in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Ultimate College Basketball HC. Get in on this new mobile game. I told you before, if like 11 or 12-year-old Doug knew about this game, I forget about it. It would have been we never would have made it this far. It would have been buried in this bad boy. Ultimate College Basketball HC. If you dream of being a college basketball head coach, it's a chance to step into those shoes. You get to control every detail of your program. You recruit the players. You hire coaching staff. You oversee the training camps. You hand out NIL deals. That wouldn't have been there for the younger version of me. Managing scholarships. It's all in your hands. Then you get to the game time. You draw up those offensive plays. That's where it's at. Set your strategy. The way you play won't just affect the current season. It's going to shape the future of your college or your school's basketball program. Game that lets you feel the full weight of what it means to be a head coach and lead your team to glory. I know that the Fighting Doug University we've gotten there. Here's a special offer for Locked On NBA listeners. Use the promo code Locked On CBB, all caps, inside the game store. You're going to get a free boost for your program. It's a perfect way to kickstart your coaching career. Download Ultimate College Basketball HC and just visit ultimate CB. Sorry, I'm going to say that again. Ultimate-CBB.com or look it up in the app stores. Ultimate College Basketball HC. Begin your coaching legacy today.
All right, so as we tie a pretty little bow on today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about the loss to the Detroit Pistons, the continued growth of Noah Clowney here, and the one quick note on him and his development, because I think you're right. We saw this, and you and I talked about it within the first handful of games when we started to notice. I mean, geez, the volume here for him from beyond the arc is staggering. I do wonder about, it's like the rest of the season's long. At some point, like, I mean, how far away are we from confirming, okay, the kid can do it from the outside, right? Like, we know that he can do this. And when you're doing it in games when you don't have the other veterans on the court, when you don't have the full complement of teammates and you're still knocking down those shots, I will be curious to see another 10, another 15 games. How much longer is it before we start to look at, and it'll never be a negative. There'll never be a detriment to when he's bombing from beyond the arc and hitting at a good percentage. It's always going to be positive to his development. But if there'll come a point when we say, well, I wouldn't hate it. The last 20 games of the year were focused on, can you put the ball on the deck and take a guy off the dribble from the perimeter on closeouts? Or defensively, what are we looking at when we talk about your versatility, your switchability, rim protection, et cetera? Just, I like the idea of at the end of the year being able to say, Noah Clowney in totality is this player for us. And he's still just 20. So there is plenty of time for the development. But that is the one thing that I'd like to have a clearer sense of by the end of the year than what we feel like right now. We're checking a massively important box, as you mentioned earlier. The other things, it'll come, because this is the hardest thing that he's accomplishing. But I wouldn't hate seeing some bigger sample sizes on the other phases of the game for him.
I mean, part of it I do think is just system, like sort of how they're playing on defense, especially when he plays with Claxton. They're just he's not going to be as close to the basket. They had playing Tosan, who's another big body here that they brought in, who's looked fine. And so I guess it's like there's sort of a system piece to it where they're just not having him play close to the basket. He has to take some smaller assignments because they just, that's just the way they're going to end up defending things. So I do think some of it has to do with just how they're playing. It's hard to kind of know. We've seen the blocks drop off. Blocks have dropped off in a huge way. He was 0.7. He was 0.7 block shots in 16 minutes a game, and he's 0.4 in 21 minutes a game. I mean, that block percentage he doesn't block shots anymore, right? Like this is a guy that had like monster block games near the end of the year. He doesn't do it anymore at all. And so that's like I find that stuff a little bit weird. I also think sometimes block shots are a product of system / a player just kind of wants to get block shots and gives up ideas around system basketball in order to make sure that the block shows up on the stat sheet for them. It's sometimes hard to know which is what. And so I don't want to make any proclamations about why exactly I think this is the case, but it is worth pointing out. And I think it's worth pointing out that if I had to make a bet right now, I think you're probably with me on this. If we had to make a bet right now, if like, oh, will this stuff ever come back for him? I would bet heavily that it will.
Yes.
It will just that this will much more look like a blip than the reality.
Yes.
And so I don't know, but I also don't have a lot of stuff to prop up my argument on that, except to say,
right, just this small sample size we had a year ago. We're like, hey, look, he flashed a lot of these other skills, and then we haven't seen it again basically since then. So we are it feels like, and you can make the case like, oh, well, yeah, but you're grasping at a very small sample size. Yes, but that small sample size last year was impressive to the point of, oh, this is going to be valuable in his skill set once he gets the full game developed.
Yeah, again, yes, and we just saw it in college, and we've seen this at other times. I don't think he has. What I don't think he has is like the Day'Ron Sharp nose for the rebound. I don't think that's part of his game, and I think he's going to be a fine rebounder. I don't think he's one of these bigs that just has this preternatural sense of sort of where the ball's coming off the rim. Like Sharp definitely has that. He has this nose of like where to position his body and where the ball is going to land and how to make sure he secures it. I do not think Clowney is that kind of guy. Some of it might be body type. Some of it might just be sort of how he wants to play. Maybe he just wants to be a guard. I don't know. like there's a world. A lot of these guys, look, not modern basketball. A lot of these guys came up watching Steph and watching guys bomb threes, and that's just what they wanted to become. Smart, because that's where the analytics tell you to go. But it's also sometimes comes at a cost of not playing tons and tons around the rim or wanting to. So I don't know, but that's what I mean when I say it's going to come back. I'm really actually not basing it on a ton, except to say I think that's going to happen.
Yeah, and we'll get to just as a programming note here, we're going to hold off on the OKC part of the conversation. We'll tap back into that because it's relative to a lot of other things that are going on, a lot of other conversations when it comes to Cam Johnson. The one thing I mentioned here, just from team level too, because do lose this game. When you go over on Tankathon, and now they're in the 6th spot. They're 13-24. They've lost 3 straight. You're looking at Utah and Charlotte, and it's actually a fan. Credit to them. Shame on me for not having his name to shout out. Posted up what Utah's schedule looks like, and there's a lot of Charlotte and Washington mixed in there coming up, where you go, hey, teams ahead of you. Somebody's going to have to win these basketball games, and the Nets may continue to be in a positive position in that regard. Positive put in very specific quotes when we talk about losing more basketball games. But there is a reminder here. You lose to the Detroit Pistons 113-98. And I was having a conversation with Koo from Locked On Pistons as well. I tell you what, they broke that man. They broke that poor man's soul with the way that they just cannot figure out their basketball team. Now they are a winning basketball team. They are above 500. And yet there is this bitter taste in their mouth about what they should be accomplishing and where they should want their pick to be, etc. The Nets in this game, there's never a risk of winning. But the Nets in this game had a 3-man bench of Jalen Wilson, who had an off night, 2 of 7, only 1 of 6 from deep. You mentioned Tosan playing, and then Reese Beekman as well. Even just having Day'Ron Sharp, who is out with illness, even just having Trendon Watford, who's going to be reevaluated next week with his hamstring and see about his timeline for return. It's not even about having Cam Johnson or D'Lo or Ben Simmons necessarily. I think you're only a couple of these other, kind of contributors away from the Nets continuing to do the things that we've seen them do under Jordi Fernandez, win a game you really don't expect them to. So they were so thin in a game like this that I think it really jumped off the page about the inability to bring in a next wave of anyone to sway the tide in this one. Like, one more player. Day'Ron Sharp's rebounding might have been the difference in this game if he was just on there grabbing double digits like he did the game prior when he was on the court.
Yeah, maybe. It's hard to tell. I mean, it didn't seem like they were ever in a threat.
Not
of really
that the eye test suggested this team could score their way or win their way out of a paper bag, but it's that reminder of how this team has found ways to manufacture wins when we have expected on nights that they get blown out and they walk away winning a game by 3,
You're right. I mean, looking at this lineup, you would think, even losing by 15 as opposed to thinking, whoa, man, that's pretty impressive. Like, look who they're playing.
Right.
One final thing too about Koo, you mentioned about the Pistons. I will say the cautionary tale around the tanking, the ideas around tanking and kind of just going and just losing for multiple seasons is what happens. It goes on a little too long, and then you just don't know what's going on, and it's really hard. And the Pistons have been in this for a while, and they've made some major mistakes. Like, they made some major mistakes first, right? They went for it with guys like Blake Griffin too early, when they shouldn't have, and overpaid. Just got dudes like this, like Tobias Harris, the first time around, or trading for him. And they just, so maybe all the draft picks haven't worked out exactly. And they kind of just I don't know. So there is a cautionary tale for when, or maybe it's like you draft Cade first, and is he a top 10 player? I'm not really sure. Probably not. Right. So maybe he's going to get close. I guess my point is, you can see why fans wouldn't want to go this route, because you can get stuck in this zone for a long time. And even now, when their Pistons are kind of interesting-ish in terms of overall basketball talent, you're like, well, what are we doing? Because it's going to be a 500 team. And so it's weird. It's like, this is kind of what sucks about the system.
Yes, and Koo, who pointed out in our discussion that the Pistons have a pick that is top 14, top 13, I think, protected.
Yeah.
So they're dancing on this weird line. You say, we got Cade, we know we have somebody, but we still want to be bad enough to get the next somebody to add to him, and it's just brutal. And you put, as you say, once you pulverize your fan base into believing that you're never going to get it right. And the Nets have, low level seeing phases of this for themselves. But once you do that to your fan base, it kind of doesn't even matter. This is a time when I thought from afar, hey, enjoy the ride, Detroit Pistons. You're above 500. You got some players, good vibes. And yet, because that the bottom typically falls out, you're always anticipating that that's going to happen and that the organization is going to make the wrong decisions. And that's, like I say, it's something that Nets fans have gone through to different degrees on different levels and scales here. The Nets have been far more violent in the pendulum of expectations, but we've lived through that since we've been doing this podcast. We've lived through bar of expectation, not meeting it, adjustment to it, and questioning whether or not the right decisions are being made on a small and large scale.
Yeah. So you just get stuck in this purgatory, and it can go on for years and years and years. It really kind of goes on till you get the best player back in the door.
The guy.
And that's kind of
the guy on your team.
Unfortunately, that's kind of the whole story. Okay, we're going to get out of here. We'll talk about that OKC thing tomorrow a little bit, about where like their packages could end up landing if they were to throw one out, because it might be a little worse than we talked about on yesterday's podcast. Make sure you subscribe over on to Locked On Nets over on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast.
Hey, you're braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think. That is one Christopher Robin.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. So back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball, yeah.